This is a Ferrari 360 Spider, and being a Ferrari, you might think that it's well outside of the realm of being affordable. It must be so expensive, in fact, that any normal person could only enjoy it from the comfort of their home by looking at photos on the computer. But you'd be wrong. The 360 was released in 1999 with an MSRP of around $138,000, and modern day you can get your hands on one for a lot less than that. So the question then becomes, should you?
To answer that question, I'm going to go through a few other questions that I ask myself when I'm up late at night looking for the next car that I can't afford to buy. So I'll go through the brochure bits, some other cars that are maybe more modern but similar performance and price point. Then we'll go through the general maintenance costs, some common repairs that I was able to find that you might want to look out for with a 360. Go through the insurance premiums, the market in general on these cars, and then we'll end with a first impressions test drive to figure out if, with all of that data, is the car still worth it? Because at the end of the day, the reason we want these cars is how they drive.
Let's start with the brochure bits. The 360 is so named after its 3.6-liter V8, a bored-out update to the 3.5-liter that was in its predecessor, the Ferrari F355. As the entry-level V8 Ferrari of its era, it produced 400 horsepower and 275 pound-feet of torque, with drive going to the rear wheels only via either a 6-speed manual or an F1 single-clutch gearbox. At its fastest, 0 to 60 was done with in 4.5 seconds and on to a top speed of 184 miles per hour.
Aside from the powertrain, the 360 brought us the first aluminum monocoque Ferrari, and relative to the F355, that new chassis provided a 40% improvement in rigidity and a 28% reduction in weight. The aesthetic of the 360 was designed heavily with the way that the air is flowing over the body in mind, and for that reason they deviated from the design language of things like the F355, the 348, and the Testarossa. The 360 was designed by Pininfarina, who drew inspiration from legendary Ferraris of the past, like the 250 LM and the Dino, so you'll get this characteristic vent here in the rear quarter panels. All very good. Also, very characteristic of this era of car, the 360 carried over the dual sets of circular rear taillights.
The 360 also started the trend of exposed engine covers, something that today has become rather commonplace in the industry. In fact, the general design language of the 360, both for the exterior and far more modern interior, was carried over to the F430 that replaced it. In its day, its performance and appeal was so favorably received that in 1999, an article in Autocar magazine called it the world's best sports car.
Unfortunately, we're no longer in the heyday of the 360, so it's pretty reasonable to want to consider a more modern car with similar performance standards. Ferrari claimed that this would do 0 to 60 in 4.5 seconds, but based on some articles that I've read, the real-world performance is more like 4.2 seconds. So in a modern car, you'd be looking at something like a 718 Cayman S or a BMW M3, both properly good performance cars. Now, granted, this was a supercar in its day, and those are sports cars today, but I think that there's something to be said that they made a car over 2 decades ago that can still perform at the same level as cars that we look at today as being proper performance cars. And also, let's not forget, as great as BMW and Porsche are, they can never really hold a candle to the prestige of the Cavallino badge.
Arguably, the scariest part of owning an older exotic is the maintenance and repair costs. So I've done a bit of research and with the Ferrari found quite a bit of inconsistency. I only called official Ferrari dealers, so I imagine that an independent shop would be less, but even with the dealers, I struggled to find any consistent pricing for, well, anything. But here are some averages in terms of maintenance. Ferrari recommends a routine fluid change every year, and that's going to be your engine oil, clutch fluid, gearbox fluid, brake fluid, etc. That will run you around $2,800. Every 3 years, they recommend that you tack in your belt service. That'll run you an additional $5,500, and your spark plugs should be replaced on an as-needed basis, figure around $1,500 for parts and labor.
Common repairs. One of the biggest problems that I've seen with Ferraris is the sticky buttons. Now, this is because of the type of materials that Ferrari uses on their interior. As they're exposed to the elements and over time, they become very sticky. Now, that might sound like it's just a minor annoyance, but it gets very sticky and it's on your drive controls, so for your gearbox. It's on your temperature control. I've even seen it on the plastic casing around the steering column. And it gets so sticky in very bad situations that the material starts to come off of whatever you're touching and end up on your fingers. It's beyond annoying, it's very inconvenient. And it's very expensive to fix. Now, depending on how bad it is and how you want to handle it, it can cost anywhere from $3,000 all the way up to $13,000. Now, I say depending on how you want to fix it, because some places will just clean the residue off, but that could remove your icons. Others will clean it off and refinish, and then they'll laser in your icons, and then some will just replace the buttons entirely. So it really just depends on how you want to handle it. As for the clutch, you're looking at $7,000 for the clutch by itself. Figure around $9,000 if you have to replace the flywheel as well. On the 360s, there's quite a lot of vibrations, so your motor and tranny mounts can get worn out. Replacing those will set you back about $5,000. And then brakes, if you need to replace your pads and rotors, figure between $7,000 to $8,000 parts and labor. Now, in terms of insurance, I actually got a quote to insure this exact car on my personal insurance on the stipulation that I would only drive it 1,000 miles a year. And I was quoted as a somewhat young man, $2,699 per year, which honestly, I didn't really think it was that much. The market on the 360 is a little bit more difficult to gauge because I found a resource through classic.com, which I will link in the description down below. With the 360, the prices are quite different. What I mean by that, the average selling price, according to classic.com, over the last 5 years for a 360 Modena, so that's the coupe, was $73,521, which is fine. But the lowest selling price was $47,129, and the highest was $162,000. Now, if you go for a Spider, you could expect to pay about a 10% premium, and manuals about a 35% premium. But why that's concerning to me is how big the range is. There's over $100,000 of gap between the highest selling and the lowest. And the way I look at that as somebody considering to buy one is that's my risk, which means these cars seem to be very sensitive to mileage, which really shouldn't come as a surprise. Ferraris have always been known to be sensitive to mileage in terms of their value, but that is something to consider, something that I consider very heavily when buying this car. So I would try my best to get as close to that average selling price as possible so that I can drive the car and, number one, not feel guilty about ruining a perfect example, but also not feel nervous and ruin the enjoyment factor because I'd be losing so much money every single time I got behind the wheel. All of that being said and all of that data is fine, but at the end of the day, if the driving experience is not enjoyable for you, none of it really matters. So what we're gonna do right now is take this 360 Spider out on the road to see, is it really worth it? So I've never driven a 360 before, and I'm hoping that you can hear me okay because I'm having to drive with the roof down so I can fit properly. You have to tailor your expectations when you're thinking about buying a car like this. With something like an M3, you can jump into it any time of day, any kind of day, rain or shine, drive it, and it's gonna be fine. You can park it anywhere and it's gonna be fine. It's not gonna draw that much attention. The only people that are really gonna be coming up to you are other people with M3s. With the Ferrari, it's gonna be a very different story, and you have to consider that when you're looking at buying one of these. You're gonna have people coming up to you constantly because the general population isn't gonna know the difference between this and a brand new Ferrari. To a lot of people, the name of a brand doesn't really matter. They don't care what kind of car they're driving. To them, it's, oh, the M3 could be faster, the Cayman could be more reliable. All of that is true, and those are all reasons to choose those other cars. So why choose the 360? Well, for starters, there's something special about when you are driving, you look down and you see the cavallino on the steering wheel. It's an accomplishment. You feel like you've made it somewhere. Also, with modern cars, you're far less connected. You don't feel nearly as much as you will in this car. See, when I turn the steering wheel, I know exactly what the wheels are doing. When I push the throttle, it just, it sounds so good. Modern cars don't sound bad, but they don't sound like this. Even modern Ferraris won't sound like this. Ferrari's not making naturally aspirated V8s. They're actually not going to be making V8s at all anymore. And so the experience of this It's not even becoming something of the past, it's already something of the past. And that's really a shame. It makes cars like this that much more special and that much more desirable. My favorite part about this car is the sound. It's just not anything you're gonna be able to experience with any kind of a modern car. They just don't sound the same. They can't. All of the emissions regulations make that impossible. It isn't all positive though. The gearbox, for example, leaves quite a bit to be desired. If you heard there, it takes a second. It's almost like there's another person in here manually changing gear for you. It's not as immediate as you'll get from a modern car. Also, maneuvering this car at slower speeds is a bit of a pain. You kind of have to find the engagement point, but you have no clutch to do so, so you're just waiting for that F1 transmission to find it for you. Please don't think that just because you're gonna be in a Ferrari, you're gonna be the fastest thing on the road. It isn't the case. There will be a lot of cars that are faster. Cars like the M3. I don't think this will beat an M3. But I don't buy my cars because I wanna be the fastest on the road. I don't really have the budget for something like that, nor do I really have the desire. I buy my cars because of the way that they make me feel, because of the experience of driving them. And with this car, it is such a good experience. Yeah. This is a great car. This is a great car.
If you judge the Ferrari on performance alone, I would say it isn't really worth it. It's by no means mind-bendingly fast, and while the purchase price is comparable to some other similarly performing sports cars, the maintenance cost and overall risk of ownership is far higher with the Ferrari. Now, that being said, after driving it, I do understand why you would buy one. It is a nostalgic driving experience, a time machine into a world of naturally aspirated engines, music that played on a CD, and a seat behind the wheel completely void of any screens or phones. It was a simpler time, and while I may be biased in my love for Ferrari, I think for the right person, those of us that have the stomach for Ferrari ownership and the means to back it up, the 360 is an experience worth having as often as you can.
That's all for this video. I want to say a huge thank you to the Paradise Automotive Group for loaning me their 360 Spider to do a video for you guys. This is a 2004 beautiful spec with silver red interior. So I will leave the regular links in the description down below to their website, their social media, as well as the posting to this exact car. If you're interested, reach out to them. Just let them know that you saw the car on my video. It makes it easier for me to do videos with them in the future. Otherwise, leave me a comment down below with your thoughts on the 360. All things considered that we talked about in this video, is it still worth it to you? Would you be considering it? I'd love to hear your guys' input. Otherwise, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you found it useful, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.